Hi, I'm Emma. The silence was a blanket. Was she wrong to read his messages? Let's get into it. The silence in our bedroom wasn't just quiet, it was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of lavender detergent and old lies. I was standing by the window, my reflection staring back at me, looking like a stranger I didn't recognize. On the nightstand, the open laptop screen glowed with a bank statement that didn't make sense. A transfer of $40,000. Gone. Not to a vacation fund, not to a medical emergency, and certainly not to our joint savings for the down payment on the house we were supposed to buy together next month. It was to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, registered to a name that wasn't my husband's, a name I had seen only once before in a blurry photo of a stranger at a charity gala. I had found it tucked inside the false bottom of the shoebox where we kept our wedding vows. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the phone, the screen cracking under the impact, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the room. But this relationship didn't end in a single moment. It ended slowly, over time. And to understand how we got here, you need to know how it began. It started 3 years ago, in the rain-slicked parking lot of a bustling coffee shop in downtown Chicago. We were both 26, running on the fumes of caffeine and the desperate hope of a fresh start. I was a junior architect, struggling to prove my designs weren't just derivative, while he was a rising star in the tech world, full of charm and an energy that made the world feel like it was moving at a speed he controlled. His name was Elias, and from the moment he offered me his umbrella, shielding me from the downpour with a grin that could outshine the gray sky, I knew something was different. We spent the next 6 months in a blur of late-night study sessions, shared takeout boxes, and conversations that stretched until dawn. He didn't just listen to me, he looked at me like I was the only person in the room, and that feeling, that absolute certainty of being seen, is a drug you never want to quit. We fell in love with a velocity that felt dangerous, but at the time, it felt like destiny. We talked about everything, the future, the kids, the house, the way we'd travel the world. I remember the night he proposed, not with a grand gesture, but while we were packing boxes for our first apartment. He dropped to one knee on the bare concrete floor, his hands covered in dust, looking up at me with tears in his eyes, asking if I'd be his forever. I said yes without hesitation. We got married a year later in a garden ceremony, surrounded by our families who were convinced we were soulmates. But looking back now, with the clarity of hindsight, I can see the first small cracks in the foundation. It wasn't a big fight or a slammed door. It was the night he missed our anniversary dinner because of an urgent work emergency, a phrase that became his go-to excuse. Then it was the way he started checking his phone with a frown whenever we were in bed, the way his answers to my questions about his day became shorter, more guarded. He started spending more time at the gym, then more time with his work friends, then more time on the road. I told myself it was just the stress of his career, the pressure of a promotion, the natural drift that happens when people get busy. I convinced myself that if I just gave him space, if I was patient, if I was the perfect wife, he would come back to the version of himself that fell in love with me. I rationalized the distance, I minimized the lies, and I kept waiting for the storm to pass, blind to the fact that the storm had already started to build. The deterioration wasn't a cliff, it was a slow erosion of trust. It started with the missed calls. Elias began to leave for work hours earlier than before, often claiming he was in early meetings. But the calls didn't come from him, they came from people who said he was stuck in traffic, or that he had forgotten his phone, or that he was asleep. Then came the arguments, the specific, recurring fights that became the soundtrack of our life. He would accuse me of being too controlling, of nagging him about his hours, of not giving him the freedom he needed to succeed. I remember one specific night, a Tuesday, I had cooked his favorite meal, a spaghetti bolognese that took hours to prepare. I sat at the table for 2 hours, the food cold, my phone buzzing with texts from his friends about a party he was supposedly at. When he finally walked through the door at midnight, reeking of expensive cologne and smoke that didn't belong to our home, I confronted him. I asked him where he had been. He didn't deny it, he just shrugged, telling me I was paranoid, that I was imagining things, that I needed to trust him. I cried, I screamed, I begged him to tell me the truth. He just turned his back and walked into the shower, leaving me standing in the kitchen, alone, wondering if I was losing my mind. That was the turning point where I almost left. I had packed a bag, stood in the hallway, ready to walk out and never look back. But then he came out of the shower, towel around his waist, his face softening, and he whispered that he was just stressed, that he loved me more than anything, that he just needed a little breathing room to clear his head. He kissed my hand, and I melted. I put the bag back in the closet. We made up, we talked, we promised to be better. I told myself it was a rough patch, that every relationship has storms. But the storm never really went away, it just got quieter, and more insidious. He started lying about money, small amounts at first, cash withdrawals that he said were for work expenses. Then it was the credit card bills that disappeared. Then it was the secret emails on his work computer, which he had never let me touch before. I found a folder labeled Personal Projects that he hadn't deleted. Inside were photos of a woman I didn't recognize, a woman who looked like the one in the photo at the gala. The rationalizations were my defense mechanism. I told myself he was going through a midlife crisis, that he was lost, that he was just seeking validation. I told myself that if I could just be more understanding, more supportive, I could fix him. I told myself that the man I married was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of stress and bad choices. I kept hoping that the moment he realized he had made a mistake, he would come back to me. I kept hoping that the love we had built was strong enough to withstand the rot that was eating it from the inside out. I was so wrong. The betrayal wasn't a single event, it was a life built on a foundation of sand that finally gave way. For the past 18 months, Elias had been living a double life. He wasn't just cheating, he was embezzling. He had been siphoning money from our joint accounts and from his own works client funds into a complex web of shell companies, all designed to funnel money to a woman named Sarah. Sarah was his former assistant, the one from the photos, the one who had been at the gala. They had been having an affair for over a year, but the financial deception was even more elaborate. Elias had convinced Sarah that they were going to start a tech startup together, a disruptive platform that would make them millionaires. In reality, the money was just being drained to support their lifestyle. Sarah had an apartment in a luxury high-rise, a car leased in her name, and a wardrobe that cost more than my annual salary. Elias had been spending hours every night in his office, not working, but transferring funds, creating fake invoices, and forging signatures. He had convinced me that the extra work hours were for the launch of his company's new product, a lie I believed because I wanted to believe it. He had even tried to convince me to invest in their startup, promising high returns, but I had said no, trusting my gut more than my husband's words. The unraveling happened because Sarah made a mistake. She had sent a transfer to a vendor in New York, and the vendor noticed the account name didn't match the company profile. They called the bank, and the bank flagged the anomaly. The investigation started with a simple audit, but it spiraled into a full-blown forensic accounting of Elias's personal and professional finances. When I found the bank statement on the laptop, I didn't call him immediately. I sat in the silence, watching the numbers scroll, calculating the total. It was over $100,000. That was our life savings. That was our future. I printed the documents, I took screenshots of the emails, and I waited for him to come home. When he walked in, looking tired, still wearing the same suit he had worn that morning, he saw the paper on the table and froze. He tried to explain, to say it was a misunderstanding, that it was for a project, that he would pay it back. I didn't let him finish. I handed him the papers, and I watched the color drain from his face as he realized that his elaborate web of lies had finally caught up to him. The confrontation was not dramatic, it was a slow, crushing weight of reality. He collapsed onto the couch, head in his hands, sobbing, begging for forgiveness, saying he was addicted to the thrill, that he didn't mean for it to go this far. But I didn't listen to his pleas. I just looked at him, the man I loved, and I saw a stranger. The betrayal wasn't just the affair, it was the complete erasure of our shared reality. He had stolen from us, from our family, from our future, and he had done it for a woman he didn't even love, but for the power and the illusion of it. The moment the truth was out, the marriage was over. It didn't end with a bang, it ended with a quiet, dead silence. The days that followed the discovery were a blur of chaos, rage, and denial. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the numbers, the lies, the way he looked at Sarah. I told my mother first, and she was shocked, but she quickly shifted into damage control mode, asking if I had given him a chance, if I was being too harsh. Then I told my best friend, who I had known since childhood, and she was the one who broke. She screamed at me, calling him a monster, a thief, a liar, and she told me to kick him out immediately. She was the voice of reason, the one who told me to get a lawyer, to freeze the assets, to cut him off completely. But then there was my brother-in-law, a man who had always liked Elias, a man who had been a close friend for years. He came over, looking at Elias's pleading face, and he told me that everyone makes mistakes, that Elias was just scared, that he was in a crisis. He told me that I should be the one to forgive, that if I left, I would be the bad guy, the one who destroyed a family. He even suggested that I should be the one to help him pay back the money, that I should support him through his rehabilitation. It was the worst advice I could have received. It was a betrayal of a different kind, a betrayal of my own pain. I felt the rage turn into a cold, hard stone in my chest. The loneliest moment came 2 days after the discovery, when I was sitting in the living room, the house empty except for Elias and his packed bags. My mother was calling, asking if I had talked to him, if I was giving him a chance. My friend was texting, asking if I needed to be called. Everyone was trying to fix it, to make it better, to make sense of the unspeakable. And I realized, in that moment, that there was no fixing this. The trust was gone. The love was tainted by the betrayal. I knew it was truly over when I looked at Elias, seeing the fear and the desperation in his eyes, and I felt nothing but a hollow emptiness. There was no anger, no pain, just a profound sense of finality. I packed my own bags, told Elias that he was out, and I left the house I had shared with him for 3 years. I moved into a hotel, and then I started the process of getting a divorce, of reclaiming my life, of rebuilding the trust that I had lost. But the hardest part was realizing that the man I loved was gone, and the man who stayed was a stranger. In the end, the story of Elias and me is a story of 2 different realities colliding. From my perspective, Elias was a man who had lost his way. He had an addiction to the thrill of the lie, to the power of the deception. He had told himself that he deserved more, that he was being held back, that the money would be a way to prove his worth to Sarah and to himself. He had rationalized the theft as a temporary measure, a way to buy his freedom, to build a life that he thought he deserved. He told himself that I would understand, that I would forgive him eventually. He thought that the love we had built was enough to cover up the crimes he was committing. But he was wrong. He had forgotten that love is built on trust, and once the trust is broken, it can never be fully restored. He had destroyed the foundation of our relationship, and he had done it for a lie. From my perspective, I was a woman who had been blinded by love. I had ignored the signs, I had made excuses for his behavior, I had convinced myself that he was just stressed. I had hoped that my love would be enough to save him, that I could fix him. I had missed the warning signs, I had ignored my gut, and I had paid the price for my naivety. I had loved him for who he was, not for who he wanted to be. I had been a victim of his lies, of his greed, of his inability to be honest. I had been a partner who had been betrayed in the most profound way possible. But I also knew that I had failed him, in a way. I had failed to see the person he was becoming. I had failed to stop the rot before it consumed us. We were both guilty in our own ways. He was guilty of the theft, the affair, the deception. I was guilty of the blindness, the denial, the hope that never should have existed. But in the end, the guilt lay where it should have, with the one who chose to destroy everything. So, we have to ask ourselves, as we stand on the outside looking in, is this a story of pure evil, or is it a tragedy of human weakness? Is Elias purely guilty, a monster who stole from his wife for the sake of a mistress and a fantasy? Or is the situation more complicated, a story of a man who was broken, who was lost, who needed help that he couldn't ask for? And what about me? Was I entirely blameless, a victim of circumstance, or did I play a part in this by ignoring the red flags, by staying too long, by hoping for a miracle that never came? The truth is, in relationships like this, the lines are often blurred. We are all capable of making mistakes, of lying to protect ourselves, of falling in love with the wrong person, or staying with them when we should have left. Elias made a choice, a terrible choice, to betray the one person who loved him. He stole from his family, from his friends, from his own future. He chose greed over love, deception over truth. And while he may have had reasons, while he may have had his own demons, the result was the same. He destroyed a life. But I also made a choice. I chose to stay, to hope, to forgive. I chose to believe that he was better than the man he was becoming. And in doing so, I allowed the betrayal to happen. I was complicit in my own destruction. So, guilty or not? Love, lies, and hard choices. You decide. Was it a crime of passion, a moment of weakness, or a calculated act of betrayal? Was I the fool who didn't see the signs, or the victim who was doomed from the start? The answer isn't simple. It's messy, it's painful, and it's real. If you're sitting there, thinking about your own relationship, about the red flags you might be ignoring, or the person you might be trying to save, I want you to know that you are not alone. We've all been there, in that moment of doubt, wondering if we should stay or go. If you've ever been in a similar situation, if you've ever been betrayed, or if you've ever been the one who betrayed, please share your story in the comments below. Let's talk about it. Let's support each other. And if you want to hear more stories like this, if you want to dive deeper into the complex, messy, beautiful world of relationships, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell so you don't miss our next episode, where we'll be talking about long-distance relationships and the lies that can grow in the silence between calls. And remember, love is hard, but it's worth fighting for. Just make sure you're fighting for the right things. I'm your host, and I'll see you next time.